They told me my land was perfect for a shortcut, and for a while, they were right. Right up until I decided it wasn't a road anymore. It didn't start with a confrontation, or a sign, or even a conversation. It started with headlights where headlights didn't belong. That's the part one keep coming back to, because it was so small at first, so easy to ignore. Just one car cutting across my field like it had somewhere better to be than the actual road. My name's Caleb Turner, and for the past 11 years I've owned 5 acres just outside a town called Ridgeway, Arizona. Not the kind of place you hear about unless you're passing through, but it used to be quiet, steady, predictable. When I bought that land, it sat between 2 underused roads, one paved but barely busy, the other gravel and mostly forgotten, and I liked it that way. I wasn't trying to flip anything or build something big. I just wanted space, a porch, a little distance from everything. Back then, you could sit outside at sunset and hear nothing but wind and maybe a dog barking a mile away. That kind of quiet. And for years, that's exactly what I had. Then the office park came in. At first it was just rumors, survey flags, trucks rolling through, a couple of guys in reflective vests arguing over measurements. I didn't think much of it. Development happens. Towns grow. You can't stop that. What I didn't realize was that growth doesn't just bring buildings, it brings shortcuts. People always find the fastest way between 2 points, even if that path doesn't belong to them. The evening I first noticed it, I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sky turn that deep orange you only get in the desert, and out of nowhere, I saw headlights cut across the far edge of my property. Not along the road, not pulling into a driveway, just slicing straight through my land like it had every right to be there. I remember leaning forward, squinting a little, thinking maybe I was seeing it wrong. But then another car followed, same line, same speed, and then a third. No hesitation, no slowing down. Like they'd all agreed this was just normal now. That's when something in my gut tightened. I set the glass down and walked out past the porch, boots crunching on gravel, and by the time I got halfway across the yard, they were gone. Just taillights fading out toward the back road. But what they left behind, that stuck. Fresh tire tracks. Clean. Direct. A straight line carved through my grass like someone had drawn it with a ruler. From the paved road on one side, all the way to the gravel street behind my land. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I decided to sit and watch. I parked my truck under the shade of an old mesquite tree and just waited. Didn't take long. First car showed up at 7:12 a.m. I remember because I checked my watch, not really believing what I was seeing. Then another. Then another. By 8:12, I counted 27 vehicles. 27. Not one of them slowed down. Not one rolled a window down. Not one even glanced toward the house. They weren't sneaking. They weren't nervous. They weren't acting like they were doing anything wrong, because in their minds, they weren't. That part, that's what got under my skin. It's one thing if someone makes a mistake, turns around, waves, maybe mouths a sorry, but this was routine. This was entitlement without even realizing it. I drove into town later that day, still trying to keep a level head about it, and stopped by the office park. It had only been open a couple months, but already you could tell it was changing everything. More cars, more noise, more people in a hurry. There was a security guard posted near the main entrance, older guy, sunburned neck, the kind of man who's seen enough to not be surprised by much anymore. I walked up and asked him straight, "You know anything about people cutting through private land to get in and out of here?" He didn't even blink, just shrugged and said, "Everyone uses that way. Everyone." He said it like it was obvious, like I was the one out of the loop. I remember letting out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because I didn't quite know what else to do with that answer. "Well," I said, "everyone except the guy who owns it." That got a look out of him, not apologetic, just mildly interested, like the situation had shifted a little in his mind, but not enough to matter. I drove home after that, quieter than usual, and pulled out the survey papers I'd kept in a folder since the day I bought the property. Spread them out on the kitchen table, ran my finger along every boundary line, every marker, every note. No easements, no shared access, no right-of-way. Legally, it was as clear as it gets. But here's the thing nobody tells you about owning land. Just because something is legally yours doesn't mean people will treat it that way, especially not when convenience gets involved. Over the next few days, I didn't act. Not yet. I watched. And what I saw made the decision for me. even if I didn't admit it right away. It wasn't just commuters anymore. Delivery vans started cutting through, tires kicking up dust like they were on schedule. Rideshare drivers followed GPS directions that clearly didn't care about property lines. And then one morning, I saw a school bus try it. That one stopped me cold. The driver made it halfway across before realizing something felt off. I could see the hesitation, the slow roll, the awkward pause, and then the bus backed out, inch by inch, like it suddenly remembered it wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. I stood there watching that yellow bus retreat, and for a second, I felt something close to relief. Like maybe, just maybe, people would figure it out on their own. They didn't. By the end of that week, the grass was gone. Not thinning gone. Replaced by a wide, dusty strip that looked less like damage and more like intention. And with that, came the next thing people always leave behind when they stop seeing a place as someone else's. Trash. A crumpled coffee cup one day. A fast food wrapper the next. Then cigarette butts scattered like little reminders that whoever was passing through didn't feel any connection to the ground under their tires. That was the moment it shifted for me. It wasn't just inconvenience anymore. It wasn't even about the cars. It was about the idea that something I had taken care of, invested in, lived beside for over a decade, had quietly turned into something public without anyone asking. And the worst part was how normal it had become to everyone else. I remember standing there that evening, hands on my hips, looking at that dirt path cutting through my land, and thinking, I could throw up a fence tomorrow. Simple. Obvious. Done. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that wouldn't solve the real problem. Because this wasn't just about blocking people out. It was about reminding them this was never theirs to begin with. And if I was going to do that, I wasn't going to do it halfway. I didn't build anything the next day or the day after that. That surprised people later when they heard the story, because they assume I reacted fast, like this was some kind of impulsive move. It wasn't. If anything, I took my time on purpose. I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with, not just the cars, but the mindset behind them. Because once something becomes routine, you're not just interrupting traffic, you're interrupting expectation, and people don't like that. So I kept watching. Mornings were the busiest, right around 7 to 9, a steady stream, like clockwork. Some drivers were focused, gripping the wheel, eyes forward, treating my land like a lane on a highway. Others looked half awake, coffee in hand, letting muscle memory guide them through a path that didn't exist a month ago. Every now and then, someone would hit a bump or swerve slightly, like they knew deep down this wasn't a real road, but not enough to stop. Afternoons were slower, but still constant, and evenings, especially just before sunset, that's when it got messy. People cutting through faster, trying to beat traffic on the main road, tires spinning a little more aggressively, dust hanging in the air longer than it should. I started noticing patterns. Certain cars showed up every day. A gray Honda with a dented rear bumper. A white pickup with a company logo on the side, something plumbing related. A rideshare driver who kept one hand on the wheel and the other tapping at his phone, probably chasing the next fare. They weren't villains, that's what made it complicated. They were just people trying to save 5 minutes. And somehow, that made it worse. Because if someone's doing something wrong out of malice, it's easy to draw a line. But when they're doing it because it's convenient, because everyone else is doing it, because it quietly became acceptable, that's a different kind of problem. That's a culture. About a week into this, my neighbor, Hank Delaney, stopped by. Hank's the kind of guy who notices everything but pretends he doesn't. Retired contractor, lives 2 lots over, always has an opinion even when he doesn't say it out loud. He leaned against my fence, watching a couple cars cut through like it was part of the scenery, then glanced over at me and said, "You gonna do something about that? Or you just letting him pave it for free?" I shrugged, still thinking. He nodded slowly, like he expected that answer. Well, thinking's fine. Just don't think too long. Folks get used to something. They start believing it's theirs. That stuck with me. Not because it was new, but because it confirmed what I was already feeling. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, same survey papers spread out. But this time I wasn't just looking at boundaries. I was thinking about leverage. If I build a fence, they'd complain, maybe even try to go around it. If I put up signs, they'd ignore them. They were already ignoring the obvious. If I called the city, they'd drag their feet, maybe send someone out in a week or two, file a report, and nothing would change. No, if I was going to stop this, it had to be something that didn't rely on anyone else enforcing it. Something built into the land itself. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. First was a local landscaper named Miguel Alvarez. Guy had done some grading work for me a few years back, knew the property, knew the soil. When I explained what was happening, he let out a low whistle and said, "Yeah, that's how it starts. You want it gone, you don't block it, you reshape it." That was the first time I heard it put that way. Reshape it. Second call was to a soil engineer out of Flagstaff, a woman named Dr. Renee Caldwell. Sharp, direct, didn't waste words. I told her I needed something that would redirect water during heavy rains, but also discourage vehicle traffic without creating a hazard. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "So legal, functional, and inconvenient." "Exactly." She laughed softly. "I like this already." We talked for about 20 minutes, going over slope, depth, drainage patterns. She asked questions nobody else would have thought to ask, like how often we get flash storms, what direction runoff naturally flows, how compacted the soil had become from the traffic. By the end of that call, I had a rough plan forming. The third call was to the county office. Not because I needed permission, but because I wanted confirmation. I explained that I was planning to improve drainage on my property, prevent erosion, and manage runoff more effectively, all of which was true. I didn't mention the cars, didn't need to. The woman on the phone checked a few things, asked about dimensions, proximity to roads, safety markings, then said, "As long as it's clearly marked and doesn't create a hazard for public roadways, you're within your rights." Within my rights. That was all I needed. I met Miguel out on the property 2 days later. We walked the path those cars had carved out, boots kicking up the same dust their tires had been throwing around all week. He stopped halfway across, looked down, then traced the line with his foot. "They made it easy for you," he said. "Already picked the route." "Yeah," I replied. "Figured I'd keep it consistent." He grinned. "Oh, we will. What we built wasn't dramatic. That's the funny part. If you drove by later, you might not even notice it at first glance. It wasn't some giant trench or barrier meant to shock people. It was subtle. A shallow ditch, about 3 feet wide and just deep enough to matter, designed to channel water during heavy rain, sloped carefully so it looked natural, like it had always been part of the land. But here's the thing about just deep enough. It's a very precise line. Too shallow, and cars roll right through it. Too deep, and you create a hazard, something that could actually hurt someone. And that wasn't the goal. The goal was interruption. Miguel and his crew worked fast, 2 full days under the sun, shaping the earth, reinforcing the edges, making sure everything drained properly. Dr. Caldwell checked in remotely, reviewed photos, made a couple adjustments to the angle. By the end of it, the ditch ran perfectly along the exact path those cars had been using. Like a quiet answer to a question nobody asked, I added reflective posts along both sides, spaced evenly, and put up 2 signs, nothing aggressive, just clear. Private property. No through access. No threats. No warnings about enforcement. Just information. The first real test came that evening. I was back on the porch, same chair, same view, but this time, I wasn't relaxed. I was waiting. Right around 6:40, I saw the first set of headlights approach from the paved road. A dark SUV, moving at a steady pace, not slowing, not hesitating, just like all the others before it. It entered the path, rolled forward, and then, brake lights. Sharp. Immediate. The front dipped slightly as the driver hit the brakes, clearly not expecting what was in front of them. The vehicle idled there for a second, like the driver was trying to process what they were seeing, then slowly reversed, tires crunching, and turned back toward the main road. No drama. No confrontation. Just stopped. I remember exhaling without realizing I'd been holding my breath. Second car came 5 minutes later. Same reaction, though this one got a little closer before stopping, like the driver thought maybe they could make it. They couldn't. By the end of that evening, 4 cars had tried. All 4 turned around. The next morning was different. Word hadn't spread yet. Cars came like they always did, one after another. And for the first 30 minutes, it was almost surreal watching the pattern break in real time. Vehicles pulling in, stopping abruptly, backing out, some drivers shaking their heads, others pausing longer, probably wondering when this had changed. By 8 a.m., you could feel the confusion. By noon, frustration. And by the end of the day, Something else entirely. Anger. Anger has a sound to it. You don't really notice it until it shows up somewhere quiet. It's not just shouting or horns or complaints. It's the way people slam their car doors harder than necessary. The way engines rev a little longer. The way someone lingers just a second too long staring at something they feel entitled to. And over the next couple days, that sound settled right over my land. It didn't take long for people to start talking. At first it was online, local forums, neighborhood groups, people posting pictures of the ditch like it was some kind of personal attack. Who would do this? This is ridiculous. Someone should report it. I didn't respond. I read a few of them, then closed the app. There's no point arguing with a crowd that's already decided you're the problem. By the end of the week, the complaints had moved offline. The office park got involved first. I saw it coming. They had the most to lose. Employees running late, delivery schedules thrown off, little inefficiencies stacking up into something bigger. Convenience had been baked into their routine, and now it was gone. A man named Victor Hale showed up on a Thursday afternoon, mid-40s, clean cut, the kind of guy who looks like he's always on his way to something important. He parked near the edge of my property, stepped out, and took a long look at the ditch before walking up toward the house. I met him halfway. "You Caleb Turner?" he asked. "That depends," I said. "You here to thank me or complain?" He gave a tight smile. "Victor Hale. I manage Ridgeway Business Commons." Figured. He glanced back at the ditch again, then back at me. "This has been causing some issues." "I imagine it has." He took a breath, like he was choosing his tone carefully. "Look, I understand it's your property. No one's disputing that. But that path, it's become an established route. People rely on it." I let that sit for a second, then shook my head slightly. "No, Victor, people got used to it." "That's not the same thing." He didn't love that answer. "Well," he said, "it saves time. A lot of time. You're effectively forcing hundreds of people to reroute every day." I nodded once. "Trespassing saves time too." That landed exactly how I meant it to. His jaw tightened just a bit, but he kept his composure. "We're not here to argue semantics. I'm here to find a solution." "All right," I said, folding my arms slightly. "What kind of solution are you thinking?" He gestured toward the path. "We could formalize it. Lay gravel, maybe even pave it eventually. Keep it maintained, safe, clearly defined. It benefits everyone." "Everyone," I repeated, "except me." "That's not fair," he said quickly. "We'd handle upkeep. Liability. You wouldn't have to." I cut him off with a small shake of my head. "No, just that. Simple. Direct." He blinked, like maybe he expected a negotiation to start there. But I wasn't interested in easing into it. "We can compensate you," he added, shifting gears. "Fair market rate for access." That part. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was tempted, but because I wanted him to think I was considering it. Silence has value, if you use it right. "How much?" I asked finally. His posture relaxed a little, like we were finally speaking the same language. "We can work that out. Something reasonable. Monthly or annual, whichever you prefer." I looked past him, out toward the ditch, then back at him. Access would be limited. His expression changed again, more cautious now. "Limited how?" "Daytime only. No commercial vehicles. And liability sits entirely with you and your company. Any damage, any incidents, that's on you." He frowned. "That defeats the purpose. We need consistent access." I shrugged slightly. "Then it's not worth it." That was the moment the conversation shifted. You could see it in his eyes, that realization that this wasn't going to be a quick fix. That I wasn't some guy he could smooth talk into cooperation because it was good for the community. This was going to cost them something real. He left not long after that, polite but clearly frustrated, and for about 2 weeks, nothing changed except the pressure. Traffic backed up on both main roads. People adjusted their routes, left earlier, complained louder. The online posts got more heated, some blaming me, others starting to question why the office park hadn't planned better access in the first place. That part was interesting, because for the first time, the narrative wasn't just about me anymore. It was about responsibility. Hank stopped by again during that stretch, leaned on the fence like always, watching cars stack up on the road instead of cutting through. "Looks like they're feeling it now," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Funny how that works." He nodded. "You holding firm?" "For now." He glanced at me sideways. "For now usually means you're waiting for something." I smirked a little. Maybe I am. And I was. 3 days later. Victor came back. This time, he wasn't alone. He had a folder in his hand, thicker than before, and he didn't waste time with small talk. "We're prepared to formalize an easement," he said, holding the folder out slightly. "Legal, binding, with compensation." I took it, flipped it open right there in front of him, pages of terms, clauses, conditions. It was thorough. I'll give them that. Their lawyers had done the work. But so had I. "I'll need to revise this," I said. He nodded once. "Of course." I spent that evening going through every line, not just reading, but rewriting, adjusting language, tightening conditions, adding something they hadn't included, something that mattered more than anything else. Control. When I handed it back to him the next day, he skimmed the changes, then stopped at one section. "The ditch remains?" he asked, looking up at me. "Yeah," I said calmly. "We build one controlled crossing, right where I approve it. Removable barriers. Clear signage." He turned another page. "And this clause, if any terms are violated, access is immediately revoked?" That's right. That's aggressive. That's protection. He held my gaze for a long second, weighing it, calculating. "Our employees won't like restrictions." I shrugged slightly. They didn't like the ditch either. Silence again, heavier this time. "You're asking us to accept limited access on land we'd be paying for," he said. I nodded. "I'm offering you access you don't currently have." That was the line, the one that ended the debate. He didn't respond right away, just closed the folder slowly, exhaled, and said, "I'll take this back to the team." 3 days. That's how long it took. 3 days of traffic, complaints, pressure building in all the right places, and then he was back. Same spot, same posture, but different energy. "We'll sign," he said. No negotiation. No pushback. Just acceptance. The crossing was built a week later, exactly where I marked it. Clean, controlled, visible. The ditch stayed intact on both sides, like a quiet reminder that the land hadn't changed, only the terms had. And for a while it worked. People followed the rules. Mostly. Daytime use, limited vehicles, steady flow through a single point instead of chaos across the whole property. But every now and then, someone would test it. Try to cross outside the designated spot. Ignore the signs. Push just a little too far. And every time that happened, I'd stand on that same porch, look out at the land I'd owned all those years, and remind myself of something simple. Boundaries don't mean much until you enforce them. So here's the question. Was I protecting what was mine, or just making life harder for everyone else to prove a point? Because depending on who you ask around Ridgeway, you'll get a very different answer. And I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Or would just let it go for the sake of convenience? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect.